guests, visitors. I am Teresa Russell, current president of the Dublin Worthington Rotary Club. And it is our 34th meeting of the 49th year of our club. And today's invitation is going to be offered by Roger Johnson. This doesn't sound very loud.
I think you're on. My wife said my voice is so low, so I gotta use this. Let's pray. Thank you for giving the opportunity to help others through Rotary. Help us understand that our neighbors, even though they may have different skin colors, ethnic backgrounds, and languages, or they look differently, help us love our neighbors. Please, with all the people on our perch, and especially former Rotarian Dr. Charles Claiborne, as he passed away recently, and Shirley Lambert, and her lost her husband. Thank you for the nourishment. Thank you for our food, for the nourishment today. Amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America.
Thank you. Yep. President-elect Jim Farmer.
In addition to our speaker, who will be introduced later, we have one visiting Rotarian today, Marty Lukel. Did I pronounce that right?
Close.
Close. Well, give me the real version. What? Okay, I'll take your word for that.
Welcome,
Let's give her
Marty.
our traditional one clap welcome.
Very good. Thank you. Anybody with announcements, you can make your way up. Might have to speak loud. I don't know. This doesn't seem to be doing its job.
Yeah, fire. Hey, hi, everybody. I told you last week, for the next 2 weeks, I'll be passing the hat around to make donations for our Rotary Cancer Endowment with the James Cancer Center. Had a few people from the club say they weren't aware that it was a Rotary project, but it is our cancer campaign for the whole district. I go next week and talk to Columbus Short North Club about it. So it's for our whole district, and it is a Rotary project, and we're very, very close to $250,000, and I'll keep you abreast of how that goes. And I'll be back next week again with a hat. So whatever you can donate, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Quick update from your peace committee. Is that working? I guess that's working. Last night, yesterday afternoon, I attended an international conference on Zoom for the Rotary Action Group for Peace. We had people from 5 different continents on that call. They're doing some really interesting things with Rotaractors around the world with positive peace. There'll be monthly meetings like that. I'll keep folks apprised. We are a peace club on the roster, so everybody, I'll keep you apprised, and maybe we'll get other folks to join the next Zoom call. Meanwhile, the other news from your peace committee is that Darnell will be back to you soon, I think, about the progress on the peace polls. Thank you.
All right, I've got a bunch of announcements. Where to start? So our Impact Club had a great meeting yesterday at Nocterra Brewing in Powell. We had, by my estimation, maybe 20 or 25 people there, including a couple of new potential members. And thanks to all of our club members that were able to come, Tom Rice, Darnell, Tim Shear, who else?
Me.
Oh yeah, Teresa. Yeah, of course. Yeah, so it was a great turnout. Everybody had a good time, and they are currently working on, I believe their next service project will be in conjunction with Tom Rice's church. They're doing a Habitat for Humanity build on April 20th. So it was great.
And Jim Allen and Ursula.
Oh yes, and Jim Allen and Ursula. There were so many people, I lost track. Next announcement. So the district is still running a membership campaign called Each One Bring One, and the club that brings the most guests between now, and I think the end of April, gets a $500 social with the district governor, so please, bring guests. Right now, our Impact Club is carrying the weight of that with all the guests they're bringing. But please bring guests. And then lastly, we are about 50 days out from our travel raffle. So far, we've raised $4,650. There's a number of you that have still not bought your tickets, so please do not delay. If you need help buying your tickets, please reach out to me. And make sure we're spreading the word as far and wide as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, and I believe we are ready for our speaker.
Sergeant.
Oh, my goodness, we have a sergeant.
Slow down.
Jerry, it's you.
And you know what you?
He did, unless he forgot.
No, I didn't forget, just. I got a lot of things going on.
There you go.
Okay, the sergeant, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Is that thing on?
It comes and goes.
Do you, if you're hearing me, why aren't you getting out your money? Yeah, okay, Charlie, thank you. All right, don't sit down, Alan. You're gonna carry the pot today.
My lunch are getting cold.
Well, if you come in on time.
Alphabetical order.
There's a reason for this, which will become evident a little bit later. Right. You can,
Everybody throw money in.
you can prime the pot now, or you can pay later. Won't make much difference. Nice to see a nice crowd here today. Is anybody happy? Because I'm gonna ask for happy dollars, but I'm also introducing another little wrinkle to give you an opportunity to donate dollars to the social fund. And that is, I'd like to ask you to share with the club an act of kindness that you have done in the last week. Now, I will begin by sharing an act of kindness, and I'll put my dollar in later. We have a neighbor that lives to our east, and she's 96 years old. And so on a daily basis, because the dispatch carrier refuses to take the paper to her door, I go over each morning and take her paper to the front door where she can easily get it. And she lives by that newspaper. So that's my act of kindness. So now, acts of kindness, I won't, I'm not gonna fine you for bragging, because sometimes, you know, people do that when they have the mic. But Alan,
Well, I have a neighbor who is a contemporary, who just seems to really abhor technology. And he was he's a retired cardiologist, trying to send a text to another cardiologist, and he brought his phone over to me, and I taught him how to send a text on a cell phone. So that's my story.
okay, any others?
He still doesn't know how to do it.
Yeah, that's right. You can show them and show them and show them. That's the trouble, you teach them to come to you. Okay, happy dollars. Yes, George.
I had my license taken away from me a year and a half ago. And I've been very, very fortunate to find somebody that's, haul me around, and, it's been wonderful. It's the next best thing to losing your license.
So you're happy that you found somebody,
Yeah.
and the somebody, it seems to me, performs an act of kindness. Who would that somebody be?
I'm the one.
Yeah, yeah,
She worked for me for 40 years.
yeah,
She raises dogs, as you know,
yeah.
and that's. Yeah, this is too.
George, not only got a manicure, he's got nail polish on.
But George, you can put in about $3.
Yeah, yeah. And I happen to know that it's wind that hauls you around upon occasion, so, nice act of kindness there, Win, thank you. All right, anybody else? Okay, back here.
Me?
Yes, you.
I'm happy because I'm back from my trip. We had a wonderful trip. We were in Bordeaux, we drank great wine. And I'm happy to see my friend Marty.
There we are. Here we are. You never know what's gonna happen if you come to Rotary. Okay. Yes, Jim.
As usual, my cat woke me up 4 times last night, and I have not yet killed him.
Okay. All right. Yes.
Okay, I have $3 left after the cap, so I can either be happy for seeing Tim and Darnell and Road, or I can tell you a kindness thing. And
Okay,
that's all I got, so I can do.
that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
I was at Safeway and a lady was trying to get the motorized shopping cart going and she was grumbling out, it wasn't working, and she was still plugged in and everything. So I went over and I unplugged her and I found the right buttons to push, and I tried to not stand in front of her because I was a little worried about that.
There you go. That's nice.
Gary, we need a clarification. Is a happy dollar a dollar or is it $2?
A happy dollar is a dollar. The limit's $3 per person. And, Tom Rice, while I'm looking at you, I'm not gonna find you. I need to talk to you today, so please don't run off after the meeting. All right?
Did I say
Lauren
Safeway?
has one.
Kroger.
I'm sorry, who? Oh, okay, very good.
The library's outreach vehicle has our new plates on it, so you'll be seeing the outreach vehicle driving around Worthington practicing before we launch on our community breakfast day.
Okay, very good. And it looks to me like there was an act of kindness right next to you. Who put in the dollar. Oh, I almost tripped over. That would have been an act of something. All right, anything else?
For the person that picked you up.
Yeah, for the person who picked me up. The rest of you would have killed them. Okay. All right, today's March 27th. And a lot of things happened on March 27th, not the least of which, Alan Zink, tell us what happened. March 27th, 1794.
70.
I wasn't here
Well, if you didn't already put in a dollar, Alan, you'll have to do it. That's the birth of the US Navy. So ordinarily, I would have just said to you folks, if you've ever been on a boat, put in a dollar, but I didn't say that. And I'm not going to, because I got a related question. This is a quiz question for the whole room, so somebody can save everybody else. On this date, the movie Titanic won their Academy Awards. How many?
11.
6.
Who said that?
6.
Teresa said that? Your president saved the whole room.
Tells you what she used to do.
Yeah, 11. Okay. On this date in 1963, Alfred Hitchcock released a movie. What was the name of it? The Birds, that's right. And so if you've ever seen a bird, then, see, that was so easy. Not on that one, baby. All right. Now, on this date in 1964, the strongest earthquake in US history occurred. Where was it? It was in Alaska, that's right. So what was the rating on the Richter scale? 9 point, close but no cigar,
everybody's put in another dollar, it's 9.2. And then I was gonna ask you, what's the end of the Richter scale? In other words, what's the highest number that can be obtained on the Richter scale?
11.
11. No, that doesn't work this time. Although that was a good guess. No, the highest is 9.9. All right, no fines for that. I did find something I thought was very interesting, and the very interesting thing was that in 1836, now, put that in your mind, 1836, the first Mormon temple ever dedicated was done in Kirtland, Ohio, which I thought was very, very interesting. All right, so now, of course, it's the end. You're expecting, let George do it. You know, I know you look forward to my dad jokes, so just a minute, I know I got a lot of jokes about retired people, but none of them work.
Not your idea.
Any more dollars?
Tim, are you the introducer?
I am.
Okay. Oh, he left it over there. Okay.
Well, I don't know if today is Mongolia Day or it's Whitehall Bexley Day. So let me start with Whitehall Bexley in introducing our speaker. I want to shout out my good friend Marty Vukolich again. Marty is the immediate past president of the Whitehall Bexley Club. And God bless her, she took my AG spot for Area 8. So she's now assistant governor. She's with us here today. But next year's president of the Whitehall Bexley Club is Carl Holtman. Carl's going to speak to you in a minute or two. I believe the title of his talk is, if it's Monday, it must be Mongolia. I had the great pleasure of meeting Carl recently because Carl serves on the district NGSE committee with Dave Hansen, Win Wixel, and I. Carl and I began to talk about Mongolia because Carl was an ESL guy all over the world. In fact, he lived in Istanbul for quite a while. I think he's going to tell us about that. But he happened to end up in Mongolia talking about English as a second language. Well, as you guys know, we're kind of involved with English as a second language in Mongolia. I'm delighted to say that Carl had an opportunity to have dinner, I think, with Arangu when he was in UB. Without much more ado, I know Carl's one of our native Buckeyes. Let's give a great Worthington welcome, Dublin Worthington for Carl.
Do I need to use this thing? Okay, here we go. So I will talk, Mongolia will be in here. It's also, again, insights from a career in English language assessment, or as I like to say, is he really a spy? Could be, could be. So I like to start with, where are you coming from? This is a question you get asked, well, I get asked a lot when you come back from overseas. It's one of the first questions they'll ask you at passport control. Where are you coming from today? So I think it's a good idea to show you where I'm coming from, where it all kind of starts. A lot of it did start, I did my undergraduate here at Ohio State. I am a Buckeye, yay. Well, I can say that. Yeah, graduate wise, I also went to Wisconsin, so I keep it in the Big Ten as well. So I can go Buckeye Badger. Hey, whoever's doing well in football, I can cheer for them that year. So I did, and so where am I coming from? Again, did my undergraduate. It was political science, and kind of actually started out as a Russian major because I studied Russian in high school. I figured I don't know what to do when I'm undergraduate. Went in as a Russian major, got more involved in political science. You start learning about the fall of the Soviet Union. And I also learned that, hey, I got interested in the Caspian Sea region, Azerbaijan. I was like, well, if I knew Russian and Turkish, I could make a lot of money working for an oil company. Never worked for an oil company, but Ohio State, gotta love them. They have everything on the books. Started learning Turkish as well. Ended up doing a study abroad there when I was an undergraduate, and that's how I eventually ended up living in Turkey for 18 years. So after I finished my master's degree at University of Wisconsin, which was Russian and Central Asian Studies, or as I put in parentheses, SPY stuff, because it was area studies, and I finished that in 2003. Started that program September 4th, 2001. We all know what happened a week later, and all of a sudden, again, people studying that area of the world everybody wants to recruit you. You become very important. I didn't want to work for the CIA, so in 2003, when I finished, I've been to Turkey before. I'm going to go back and learn business over there. So I enrolled as an MBA student in Turkey. So I went as an international student. And like international students sometimes do, you kind of get there and it's like, life happens. So you get offered a job at a newspaper, start working there, and 18 years later, you're still there. So I have a lot of empathy for what I then ended up doing, which is getting into ESL, International Student Recruitment, because I have empathy for those students. So again, which three-letter acronym do I work for? Because I've worked for a lot of three-letter acronyms, but they're all related to education, not the CIA or something like that. Again, but everybody thinks international education makes a good cover story for what I could be doing. And so that works with, I worked with ELS language centers, which, at the time, was one of the largest providers of English language for international students coming to the US. They had like 60 centers all throughout the US, and I helped establish their operations in Turkey. Same with IDP IELTS. So IELTS is probably the #1 English proficiency test in the world right now. So, again, setting up their Turkish operations, the TLC, the language company, and almost OSU. So OSU at the time, about 10 years ago, was looking to establish what they call like a flagship, so they had a flagship center in India. They were looking to establish one in Turkey as kind of a central point for that whole region. They had Gordon Gee over there, got to meet Gordon Gee in Istanbul. Woo, yay! But, that didn't pan out, so they didn't go forward with that. But again, working mainly in international education, that English language assessment, with also occasional forays into journalism and government propaganda. Did 5 years of editing for the Turkish government for their Invest in Turkey. So trying to get foreign investment into the country. So kind of interesting stories for another time or for questions. So I like to think I'm on a list somewhere when I come in because I never get questioned. Any country I go into, they don't care. So I'm either on a list as mostly harmless, but more likely potential asset follow. I'm pretty sure it's the latter. So, what I have there is the only time I've really been questioned is when I came back entering into Portland once. And the guy asked, knowing I was coming from Turkey, is like, have you been to the Syrian border recently? And this was about 5 years ago. So, and, a lot of stuff was happening, obviously, with Syria, Turkey, ISIS, etc. I didn't skip a beat. I looked at him and said, please define recently. Because I didn't want to answer incorrectly because, he said within the past year. I said, no, I'm good. But why I say this is, again, kind of a never a dull moment when you're dealing with, where English assessment takes you, English language education takes you. I did go to Syria in 2010, so that was, right before the Arab Spring started. And that's when I was working for ELS Language Centers, and I helped set up a scholarship program where we'd have students do an essay contest, and the winner of the essay, speaking contest would then come to the US for a month and study at one of the ELS Language Centers. So that was kind of a interesting thing that we did there. It also took me to 3 weeks in Siberia, in Russia at one point. So in the middle of February, I went out to Tomsk Polytechnic University in the middle of Siberia because they wanted to do some language assessment at their universities. And I kind of looked at that. Well, if I go there on a business visa and get a hotel, it's like $500 for 2 days, right? Expensive. If I enroll as a student at their university for 3 weeks for their Russian language boot camp, $400, I live in a dormitory. So I spent 3 weeks learning Russian, but at the same time also doing language assessment for the university. So that was kind of an interesting experience being in Siberia in the middle of winter. It also took me to places like northern Iraq, so Iraqi Kurdistan, where I worked with American University Iraq Suleimaniye, setting up their kind of English proficiency programs, and also somehow getting involved twice in what they call the Iraqi Bioscience Fellow Program. What that means is they would find scientists in Iraq that worked in essentially chemical and biological weapons and would bring them over to the US, where they would study with their university counterparts for about 6 months and do research. Somehow I got drafted into doing the logistics for all the pre-departure stuff. It's, the stuff you just get dragged into because, hey, I've been there and all that other fun stuff. And then also Mongolia as well. So Mongolia, I've been to twice at this point, both again for international education and English as a second language. And what's interesting about Mongolia, I mean, I know your club's very active there, in that, but the country is really making an effort, a concerted effort to promote English language education now, such that they're really starting it at a younger age. I think previously they would start usually about 5th or 6th grade. Now they're bringing that down to 3rd grade. And there's talk that they even want to, at some point, make it kind of the official second language of Mongolia, because they're trying to get out of that Russian and Chinese sphere of influence. So there's a lot of money that's being invested into the country in terms of how do we get the English language education up, how do we do the assessment, which is what I'm involved in, kind of the assessment. And one of the interesting stories that actually came out of Mongolia on the assessment front is when I was talking to a colleague there that was running a grant through the embassy. They were working in School 29 in Ulaanbaatar, which is the school for the hearing impaired. So they were teaching children American Sign Language and ESL. And I heard this and said, wait a second. We can help with the assessment there because, with our assessment test, I can, give them a reading and a writing module, but then give them a video interview where they can you can pose a series of questions to the student and they can, sign essentially an answer that can then be graded. And, it was Mongolia that, it made me start to think like, hey, this has implications on a much larger scale in terms of what we can do, to the point that then I came back and met with Gallaudet University in Washington, DC, our preeminent university for the hearing impaired here, and spoke to them. It's like, hey, how can we work together to promote, English language assessment and American Sign Language at the same time, because it's becoming more and more important, especially as we get new Americans here in the US. And, again, may be coming, maybe they're hearing impaired, they need to learn English and American Sign Language. And even a deaf person born here in the US, English is a second language to them. So it's, kind of just finding that connection, that, that spark from Mongolia to get me to think, hey, how can we take this on a larger scale? So that's interesting. Again, when you start going everywhere, all these sparks of inspiration that you get. Let's see. And again, what's great about English language in general, or languages in general, it is the bridge to other cultures. And our government puts a lot of money into English language education as well, and really promoting that, because it's the soft diplomacy, teaching English language overseas. And they do these through, what they call the regional English language officer, which are based at various embassies throughout the world that kind of do the English programming, that help with the assessment. And your tax dollars also go to fund a site through the State Department called American English, where you can go on there and get all the free resources. So we really take a strong approach to the soft diplomacy as well through English language. And I have great personal experience with that as well, because when I was living in Turkey, I worked with the regional English language officer to get, funding to start a program where we worked with girls in southern Turkey, which is this one, so the impactful, the projects and initiatives. So one of the initiatives that was very close to my heart, again, dealing a lot with education, the intersection of education, English language, assessment, was, working with this colleague here, that's Fatima, and then that's her daughter. So she lived down in southern Turkey in the Hatay province, and we worked together to start a program called Be the Voice of Girls, which was funded through the US Embassy there in Turkey. And we were working with 9th grade girls from marginalized backgrounds there in southern Turkey over a 9-month period, teaching them English through an art-infused curriculum. So every month we'd have a different art form that they would work with and learn English. And what that also allowed us to do is, again, you're tapping into all sorts of different parts of the brain when you start incorporating art, movement, performing art, and you're learning a language. Sometimes you'd have girls who are very strong, in art, maybe not so much in English. Some girls are very strong in English, not so much in art. But you put them together in this 9-month program, and you just see that change over the 9 months of what happens when they're working and they're learning arts, they're interacting with American counterparts and experts that are also teaching them. So one of the modules was even called the art of the interview, where I had a journalist who's a Rotarian, I think he's in DC now, but he would work with the girls over that month, again, opening them up, getting them confident to ask questions, which again, once they started doing that, and then it culminated in Ask the Mayor Day, where they would sit down with the mayor and start asking him questions, and everybody loved it. So it was a very interesting project. Now, the sad part about this, though, is since this was in southern Turkey and Hatay, that's where the earthquake was a year ago. So that's where, we lost Fatma and her daughter, and 2 other girls that were part of that program. And by that time I had already moved back to the US, but, I want to, keep carrying on this mission of Be the Voice of Girls. So that's something, I'm trying to, build more upon. And the reason we do this is, if it comes on, there we go. Let's see if it will start the video. In theory, we'll start a video. Letters to a girl and this is why we do projects like this. So the Letters to Dasha project was, one of Fatima's visions, because she had spent some time in Ukraine with her daughter as well. And they had met, this girl named Dasha. So they came up with the idea, well, let's, have our girls write letters to Dasha and then, put them on video. So that this is what that was. So, she was doing that letter to Dasha. So kind of, doing those connections. I mean, English, teaching English, and meeting people and creating an impact in lives of like young girls like this. That's why we do what we do. It's very impactful. Now back to Mongolia. So yes, so this was when I was back there
again, I think again at the end of October, so there's Aringu and I think it's Angie, is Aringu and Angie. So kind of like, you know, bringing this kind of all back. So when I was at this dinner, I was even talking to Aringu about that project, Be the Voice of Girls, and she was like, how do we do this in Mongolia? So I mean, I think it's a project that speaks, you know, across the globe in terms of, you know, what can be done. So I was very inspired by that meeting with Aringu to see, okay, there is, you know, a need for this or an interest in expanding this program. And again, especially if it is maybe like under the auspices of Rotary. So, you know, I was very encouraged by that, you know, so, you know, it was good. It was a good experience for me. You know, that's kind of, you know, the quick background. I like to open it up to questions. I like questions about anything. Tim has a question, go for it.
Well, I got a question, but first a comment. One of the presentations made by the Rotary Action Group for Peace at their big consortium on the webs on Zoom yesterday were these folks working specifically with young women. I think the guy who is the past district governor in Colorado, one of the districts in Colorado, is the point of contact. So I'd love to put you guys together. Secondly, so what can you say about the burgeoning linkages between Turkey and Mongolia or some of the other places that are the new independent states out there?
Yeah, I mean, Mongolia, you know, was definitely very interesting for me. Again, I've been there, been there twice in the past 5 years. But again, very, very difficult place to get to. But, you know, seeing where it is sandwiched, like geopolitically, I understand why they're trying to invest a lot of money in the English language. You see this also a lot in the Central Asian states, so the stans. So in Uzbekistan, there was I think it was about 15,000 teachers were trained over the past couple of years, you know, to be able to teach English. So that, you know, a lot of money was put in through American Councils, which is an NGO based out of Washington, DC, and the State Department. Again, lots of English language training going on in Uzbekistan. Assessment wise, we've been doing some assessments in Tajikistan as well. So there's a lot going in, you know, that goes back to the soft diplomacy of English language. You know, there's a lot of money that's being put into that because it's seen kind of as a safe way. You know, it's just, you're just learning a language, but you know, as you learn a language, you then learn a lot about the culture as well, and you know how, you know, even how that culture, you know, perceives the, you know, every day. So a good example of that, you know, I did live in Turkey for 18 years, so I like to think, you know, I learned a bit of Turkish, you know some Turkish. In Turkish, there is a saying, like if you're just walking down the street, like somebody's like sweeping the street, you know, we have a saying, you just say kolay gelsin, which is, you know, may it come easy. You can say that to anybody, like if they're doing a job, anything, just on the street, you know, just doing their work. You just say kolay gelsin, you know, it's just kind of a nice throwaway, but it's like, hey, you know, may your work come easy to you. Coming back to the US, I'm like, is there something I can say? If I'm just walking down the street and somebody's, you know, picking up trash, or like, what do you say? I mean, there isn't necessarily the equivalent other than like, you know, maybe this like, you know, wave or something like that. But the idea of like, you know, kolay gelsin, you know, may your work come easy to you, you know, take it easy, you know, as opposed to just kind of like, maybe a hi if you're lucky, you know, kind of just acknowledging the way, you know, in Turkish or in some other languages, just the acknowledging the existence of someone and saying, hey, you're there, as opposed to just shuffling along with your head down sometimes. Yes.
My question is, maybe more basic. I'm curious to know, first of all, from your background, when you learned English, did you learn, how do you teach it, and how did you learn it? Did you learn sentence structure and things, or is it conversational? What's the method?
Well, I mean, when I learned, you know, foreign language, so the first foreign language I learned was Russian. And then, there was Turkish in university before I even moved over there. I think the way that we learn, languages, foreign languages here in the US, at least, 20, 30 years ago, a lot of it was just, it's grammar based, it's reading here. I was learning Russian from old Soviet textbooks at that point. Like, here's Ivan Ivanovich, and he likes to play chess. So again, you get the whole, communist realism in some of that. But I think a lot of it previously, like, our generation and stuff might have been, here's your textbook, you're learning grammar. There is a move, even going back to English now, since, we're into teaching English. There is a major movement back to phonics. Phonics for a long time was, disregarded, there's other ways to learn English. Now we're actually moving back to phonics is actually very important at the early literacy levels, or even for, even at the adult level. Again, if you're a new immigrant, you've just come over, you don't necessarily speak English, starting just with, with the phonics-based education, that's come back into vogue now. So I think there's a major push to get that. But then you also see what the much younger generation is doing now. You pull out a phone, you do Duolingo. It's like, it's become gamified. Language learning has become gamified quite a bit nowadays. But what that means is, I'm doing Duolingo, I spent an hour on my app today, kept my streak up, I played my game, but are you really learning the language? I mean, Duolingo, you might learn how to say the purple cow gives spotted milk, or, vice versa. You're not necessarily, learning from like an immersion standpoint per se. So you might get, basic or, low intermediate type level out of that. But that still seems to be all the vogue, pushing a kid to an app or to a smartphone to learn a language. You can also see, even in higher education, there are some universities that are starting to go that way. With West Virginia, for example, I don't know if any of you are aware of that. West Virginia University essentially cut all of their global language programs except for Spanish. And essentially because they got a deal through Rosetta Stone, it's like, hey, our students can just learn on an app. We don't need to pay teachers or faculty to teach a language anymore. I was just at a language conference last week in Tampa. It used to be, if you go there'd be a lot of exhibitors saying, hey, come here, get your English teaching certificate, go be a teacher, come teach in Taiwan or something like that. Not anymore. The exhibit floor is dominated by, hey, I have this app, learn language through AI. So it's, I think there's like a major push now, like, let's just do it all to AI. The pendulum's gonna swing back at some point because you need the human element. You need the human element, you need the immersion as well at some point, if that's practical. I think that was a long-winded answer, but.
It's actually a comment and a question, is that I have an aunt, an uncle, and then cousins who ran mission hospitals in rural India. And one of the first things they would do after opening the hospital was to start an English media school for that area, because it was like the jet stream in India to out of poverty. Because if you learned English, you could get a lot of different kinds of jobs. So that was back in the 1950s, 60s. And it seems to have really paid off for those hospitals, because they were also accepted in the community because their kids were becoming much more wealthy and had better jobs coming out. Is that part of what you've seen? And is that part of what we're looking at in Mongolia that could help?
I mean, it's definitely something that's, English is essentially, it is a way out of poverty. Again, that's why, our program, we started that down there in southern Turkey where they're marginalized, and in the province where we're doing, you also had, Syrian refugees, you had Kurdish. It's that learning English for a lot of people, it is that way out of poverty. Even if it means, they're staying in, they stay in Turkey, but hey, I speak English, now I can work in the major tourism industry, for example. So I mean, it certainly is a way for them to move up. But at the same time, so we're blessed in the sense that, yeah, we were born here, you know, we speak English, you know, you know, that's great. But at the same time, we also need to encourage, you know, more of our Americans to be learning, you know, learning language as well. You know, again, simply because you do learn a lot about a culture and the people through learning that language, you know, it breaks our hearts. That's why when I, you know, went to high school and like the mailing came in, like, which language do you want to learn in high school? You know, I think it was like, you know, German, Spanish, French, Russian was on there. Like, I want to learn Russian because, you know, I grew up, late seventies, eighties, you know, you got Gorbachev, you got Chernobyl, you got all that, you know, the Russians are the bad, you know, the enemy, you know, still, you know, kind of there at the end of the Cold War thing. I want to learn that language because I don't think they're, you know, they are the enemy. So, you know, and that's also what I learned, you know, traveling this, 70 different, you know, countries, you know, we are all human, you know, put the politics aside, you know, and to be able to, you know, converse with someone, you know, again, luckily, you know, if it's English, that's great, you have a conversation, but if not, you know, you can, you know, now you have Google Translate, you still have conversations nowadays, if you need to, you know, just connecting with people on that human level, I think is very important. Yes.
A couple comments and then I'll lead to a question. The first is, former mayor of Columbus, Buck Reinhardt, is the one that brought the pandas here. Had, you know, visited China as part of his effort to bring the pandas to the Columbus Zoo. And while I was there, he said, "Can I visit a classroom?" And they took him to a high school classroom. And he said, "Well, I need to know." They said, "No." The students all spoke fluent English. And he said, "You know what's scary to me as mayor is there are more people in this room who speak English than there are in all of Columbus, Ohio, who can speak Mandarin Chinese." Yeah. Okay. And, so that's the one observation. The second, though, is so that kind of supports your point that it is also, you know, although we are blessed that we speak a language that most of the world, or much of the world either speaks or wants to speak as a second language. But we also have, you know, it perhaps good for us as individuals to learn a second language as well. But the flip side of that is what's happening throughout Ohio universities, for example. You gave the one example of West Virginia, but the state universities of Ohio, from Wright State to Ohio State, they're all evaluating their programs. They're saying we have too many majors, right? We got to cut costs. And on the short list for elimination, on all those are a whole bunch of majors relating to either classical or modern languages. They're not eliminating all of them, so you can still take, you know, like a first or second year French or Spanish or German or whatever class. But things like the major in German education, French education, Spanish education, those are all in the chopping block. The upper division courses and all those are all in the chopping block, which is going to result in reduction in faculty, which I think will ultimately make it tougher even to offer those early courses because you got, you know, you can't hire faculty just to teach first year courses. So my question is, how do we reconcile those? How do we reconcile this? The fact that it seems to me it is important for Americans and other industry people to speak an additional language if they can with what's happening in higher education and how that's going to affect elementary and secondary.
I think you're steering the topic for my next talk.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, it is very disconcerting, you know, again, to see what's happening with West Virginia, other universities, again, that'll look at.
Ohio State's right.
Yeah, I mean, exactly, I mean, you know, they'll put those on the chopping block, and then, like I said, you know, then they come back and say, yeah, you know, my student, you know, our students are fine, you know, just doing it through an app. They can learn their Spanish through Duolingo, Rosetta Stone, and university, hey, you know, they can just, you know, get a check and be happy with that. Which, again, is also a slippery slope, because if you go down that route, okay, we cut languages because they do through AI, at what point do you say, we don't need a brick and mortar university anymore? You know, so, you know, I think there's a slippery slope. The pendulum does need to swing back the other way. I mean, you see, even with, you know, the intensive English programs in the universities are being cut left and right. And, you know, those used to kind of be the bread and butter. Hey, this great revenue generation, get students in here to learn English and then progress them on to a degree. Even those are getting cut again, because the university is like, oh, students gonna already come over, you know, or they said, we don't even need them to know English anymore as an international student. We really don't care because they can come to our class or they're gonna do a virtual class and then get the textbook in their own language anyway. It doesn't really matter. So, you know, it's getting, you know, disturbing to see that trend where, you know, we may not even care at some point, you know, for the international student coming over because, you know, hey, they're paying full fees of revenue. I don't care if they speak English or not, they'll muddle through it. But then to take opportunities away from our students to learn a foreign language as well. I hope that in the next, you know, let's say 5 to 10 years, again, we see what's going on in the world, that we'll know, you know, if again, as China starts to exert more influence, people start to see, you know, maybe it is good that we do have people that, you know, that know Mandarin, you know, so that we know what's going on, you know, over there. Again, that's why they, you know, Russian is also gonna see, you know, major uptick, you know, people wanting to learn Russian again, major uptick with what's going on, you know, kind of in that part of the world, just to understand what's going on. So hopefully, it'll swing back the other direction. Because I would hate to be where we get to the point where a university is just, you know, an engineering faculty and that's it. At the end of the day. You know, there's something to be said for the little white
I think we have
education.
time for one more question.
Okay.
Right here.
Well,
I'm just gonna, last question is like, how, you know, we use assessments, how are we gonna use those assessments to build, like, or develop teachers, you know, in English?
Yeah, so I mean, so.
In Mongolia.
Yeah, so, I mean, so, you know, in Mongolia, also like with our assessments, so going kind of back to the topic. So the assessments that we use are built upon what they call the Common European Framework. So, you know, people taking our assessment, it's like explaining the metric system of US higher ed. But, you know, you get a grade anywhere from A1 up to C2, A1 being like you're low beginner, you're nothing. In the B range, you're kind of what they call somewhat independent, you can function in C or native. So on that Common European Framework, which, you know, the rest of the world understands very well, and it's universal for all languages. So, you know, someone who's a B2 level, which would be upper intermediate, which based upon the can-do statements of the Common European Framework says I should be able to function in a university setting. That's across all languages. So if I'm a B2 level in English, I can understand a lecture in English in university. If I'm a B2 level in Mongolia, it's the same. I should be able to understand. Now, it might take 5 years to get to a B2 level in Mongolian as opposed to, the time spent is different, but we do our assessments based upon that Common European Framework, which is understood around the world. You know, companies say I need a B2, universities say I need a B2 or a C1 for admission into university. So that's what we're doing. So we're using a very common standard, not just giving some number that needs to be translated to something else.
Thank you.
Okay.
Will you be able to stay after for more?
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful. All right, thank you very much. That was interesting. And Bonnie, we have a raffle.
Yeah, we got it. Last four digits are 6339.
Oh, excellent. Lisa,
Yeah. And you win $26.
$26.
Sure.
Don't get mad at me if I don't pull it.
Act of kindness. Oh, pull mine for an act of kindness.
She told me first.
6399.
That's not it.
oh, yes, it is.
All right, Ken, come on up, take the card.
$214.
Oh, boy.
Leave it for somebody else.
No, Jerry.
That one? Ace of Hearts.
Close, no cigar.
All right, 4-way pass. And of the things we think, say, and do, first, second, third, and fourth. Thank you. Don't forget to turn in your badges, and thanks for all those that volunteered today. We're adjourned.
There was one time we got here and it was late. I was thinking that's right. I think you're the first person in line.
We're trying to put together actually a grant, do that regional English language office. So I'm not sure if it's lost that. I think it's pretty well, he's like, it seems like, they got, can I put another grant? He's like, yeah. $20 million. He's like, he was playing with programs and cars. She was like, yeah. I'll go over there and try to